Hello, good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening. Welcome to AWS Security Live. We are live on air for the second day running, actually. So my name is Rob Hale. I'm AWS's security partner leader across EMEA. So I glue together our partner community together with AWS solutions to solve for customer security challenges. As ever, and you're probably bored of me now by 2 days in, but we have an amazing session for you today and an amazing guest. But I'm joined by my co-host Himanshu.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone. My name is Himanshu. I lead the team of our worldwide security, identity, and governance worldwide specialists. We help customers with their security outcomes and often leverage AWS native security services and our partner tools. That includes both our technology partners and service partners. Yeah, and as Rob mentioned, you were right in the middle of the AWS Summit season. And yesterday was our partner summit in London. And today is the London Summit, which is currently ongoing. And you must have logged in, some of you, into our Partner Summit live stream from London yesterday. And we're continuing that streak with partners. Speaking of partners, we do have one of our service partners who's joining today from Rackspace.
Yeah, we've got as you may know, we've got every session we have a new partner on come on and talk about particular things, and we broadcast from 8 a.m. PST. That's 4 o'clock GMT. Or 5 o'clock if you're our European friends. So, but today we've got Craig Fretwell from Rackspace. So, Craig, welcome to the show.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody.
Great to have you on board. Rackspace. So, talk to us about what Rackspace do, but also how did you get into security? What do you do at Rackspace, and how did you get there?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, of course. Firstly, my name is Craig Fretwell. I'm the global head of the Rackspace Cyber Defense Center. I've been at Rackspace for a couple of years now, leading our cyber defense practice for Rackspace Managed Security Services. I lead a global team of security professionals. RCDC is my team, and we're responsible for keeping customers protected and safe, detecting and responding to threats, hunting down vulnerabilities before attackers get in, monitoring the broader threat landscape, and keeping an eye on the customer's digital footprint in the world, if you will. I'm also the creator of the Rackspace AI Security Engine, or RAISE, and the evidence-led threat hunting using AI agents model, which I'm sure Rob would like me to talk about later. Can I also mention that I'm also a 4 times Microsoft Security MVP, or will you never invite me back on the show?
Oh, don't know. It depends if you if you also get the AWS golden jacket. I mean,
what is this golden jacket you speak of? This sounds sounds exceptional.
If you take your technical certs on AWS, and you get and I can't know what the number is, but I think it's all of them. You get to wear a golden jacket at every AWS event. It is a huge mark of recognition that the people strive for. So I'll send you the links.
Is it actually a physically gold jacket? Like, what are we?
It's 18 a gold karat, 22 jacket, in fact. Yeah.
Oh, splendid. Yeah, I'm sure I look excellent in that.
It's something that you can wear along. Yeah, and I can attest to that. One, it's very coveted, and second, if you come to like any of AWS's learning experience events, whether it's reInvent or summits, you will be noticeable.
How many people have this golden jacket you speak of? How many?
It's a very exclusive club. I would say, it's like out of all the builders and developers, it's like 1 in 1,000 is a ratio.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a high bar, but you can do it.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lot of pressure, Rob. It's a lot of pressure. I wasn't planning for this much pressure, to be honest.
Yes. But Craig, I think to your point earlier, one of the things that's important is that security is a community industry, and I think we need to be together in this as a community, especially now more than ever. I think you can probably talk more about your viewpoints, but we noticed that in today's world with artificial intelligence and automations, obviously, a lot of good innovations and a lot of good developments are happening, but at the same time, it's also landing into the hands of adversaries. So we as a community need to do everything that we can. So, hey, if you're learning other technology and other platforms, that's totally fine.
Yeah, we love it. We love it. And to be honest, security is one of those things that spans across all the platforms. So it's the
Absolutely.
the foundational concepts are the same. It's just flavors of how you achieve that. So they're great to have you on board. And you haven't had a kind of a direct route in terms of what you're doing now. So, and I thought we have a chat obviously before the session, just to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about. And your story was quite cool. So I wonder if you mind kind of sharing with our audience.
Yeah,
And
of
if you're
course.
in our audience, by the way, and you want to ask Craig any questions, then do ping us on chat and we can ask questions. But Craig, could you take us through kind of how you got into security and what your background is?
Yeah, of course. So honestly, it really wasn't planned. I was a young kid. I was very curious about computers, and I mean that in the least innocent way possible, because kids on the computers in the 90s, we weren't exactly ethical. We were downloading things we shouldn't, LimeWire, running tools, we didn't really fully understand. I had no idea what I was doing half of the time. But I was absolutely everywhere I wasn't supposed to be. And somehow that just kind of never stopped. It was one of those constant beasts where I wanted to understand more. I remember I defragged my first computer. I thought I was Edward Snowden. But how it really began in the beginning, I guess my security journey, if you will, was I was at school in a French lesson. Every week we had French, and it was one of these gigantic classrooms with big computers everywhere. Those giant, massive CRT monitors, the ones that weigh like 40 kilograms. You sit like 6 inches away from your face and makes like a high pitched sound that only dogs can hear. I'm pretty sure if you stared at that monitor long enough, you turn radioactive. But those devices were exceptional, beautiful, running Windows XP. And I'm messing around on this computer during a lesson, and I discover this terminal, right? Immediately, I'm like, "Oh, what is this?" So I start messing around in the terminal, and for the younger folks on Twitch and YouTube, this is Windows XP had a net send feature, which let you send a message to any computer on that same network. There was no authentication, no permissions. It was just pure chaos on demand. It was great. So naturally, I'm extremely curious, and I've got passionate for technology. I immediately sent a message to the entire classroom saying, "School is cancelled. Go home." So, and I want to be very clear: this is not a sophisticated attack. This was no exploit. There was no lateral movement, no persistence. It was me just typing on a keyboard and pressing enter. The moment I did that, the children were packing up their bags, pushing chairs in. The French teacher, she was losing her mind. And at approximately age 13, that was my first social engineering attack. However, I did not get to go home. I went to the head teacher's office. I got suspended for a week. Sorry, mum and dad. Now, at the time, I kind of felt like Neo from the Matrix, but instead of taking the red or blue pill, I got suspension. So looking back, I was so intrigued the whole time, thinking, how did that work? Why was that possible? How did my school's IT team know it was me? Like, how? And I guess that's kind of the first place that I started getting into cybersecurity, if you will.
Awesome. Playing with NetSend. Yeah, I learned Linux and a bit of Unix and stuff from that same kind of journey, and messed around with all sorts of stuff at school. But it's that curiosity that I think makes a good security person, whether you're, if you're whether you're skilled at offensive security or defensive security. It's that curiosity in terms of how things work and how things maybe shouldn't work that kind of helps you to see, I think, a lot of things. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Of course.
So within Rackspace, so that sounds like a really, really cool job. So what do you guys do for customers? And what are we when we're thinking about kind of who we are, who we're trying to defend our environments from? What are their capabilities and how are they changing?
Well, so Rackspace, if I can, give you a bit of brief history. So Rackspace started in San Antonio in 1998 with really a very simple idea, and it was hosting should feel less like infrastructure and more like a service you can trust. So in the early days, while there were other companies selling raw compute, Rackspace really built its reputation on something different and something human, and they called it the fanatical support. And that really became kind of the foundation that everything really followed after. Then a pivotal moment really happened that changed not just Rackspace, but the cloud industry itself. So in 2010, Rackspace partnered with NASA, the people who send ships to the moon. Is it ships or is it rockets? Anyway, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole.
Both.
It is both, right? Which one is it though? Ship is like on the ocean. Is it a rock? So let's park that for another term. I feel like we could get into a great conversation around that. But Rackspace and NASA basically were trying to solve a problem neither could tackle alone. NASA had developed this incredible scalable compute platform. Rackspace had very deep expertise in cloud operating environments, and together they launched OpenStack, not as a proprietary product, but as an open source project. And that decision was very disruptive and deliberate, and it challenged the idea that cloud innovation had to be locked behind vendor control. OpenStack became a global movement adopted by enterprises, governments, and service providers, really shaping that future of private and hybrid cloud. But Rackspace didn't stand still. It's hyperscalers like AWS. Rackspace evolved again, and instead of competing head on, they repositioned themselves and they became a partner, just like we're a strategic partner with AWS. And navigating that across multi-cloud environments was better for Rackspace to handle at scale for customers. Not just running infrastructure, but securing it, optimizing it, and making it work in the real world. And today, really, Rackspace sits in an entirely different category of its own. The DNA is still there, service-led, fanatical experience, customer first, and that is now applied to some of the most complex environments in the world, from a hosting company in Texas to co-creating one of the most influential multi-cloud and AI platforms ever built. It's becoming a globally recognized service provider. Its story isn't about chasing trends, it's about really shaping them, and that's what we're doing right now, especially with AI in the Cyber Defense Center, which I'm responsible for.
That's cool. That's cool. And I remember when I joined AWS, which was 9 years ago. You can put OpenStack on top of EC2, so you could deploy that, and we had customers doing that. So you mentioned AI, and of course, everybody's talking about AI, but there's a lot of capabilities. There's a lot of press and PR and kind of fun around AI, and particularly in the offensive security kind of world. So, what are you guys seeing? How are you seeing AI actually influencing attacks? Are you seeing different attacks? Are you seeing more scale? What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Rob. And honestly, adversaries are an absolute nuisance, aren't they? I mean, I wouldn't be in a job if they weren't around. So thanks. But what adversaries are actually doing with AI is kind of where security conversations really go wrong. I think the instinct when facing a threat that appears to be accelerating is to reach for the most compelling explanation. It's an AI-powered attack, automated adversarial tooling, machine speed intrusions. These narratives, they're everywhere right now. And to be honest, some of the answers some of them are very real, but some of them are more specific than people realize. We cannot always see inside an adversary's toolkit, but what we can do is observe the tactics, the techniques, and the patterns that surface in observability data. And what those patterns increasingly suggest is that AI is enabling a level of precision and speed that is changing the nature of the threat. And it goes well beyond automation. Consider what becomes possible when an AI is applied to stolen data. So tools configured with the right prompts could detect fear, embarrassment, deception within internal communications. You can extract names, roles, organization hierarchy structures in seconds. And having that capability to map relationships and then surface the conversations that carry the most leverage and weight, like a CEO discussing a sensitive acquisition, a private exchange between a CIO and a whistleblower. What that produces is not just data's been stolen, it's targeted intelligence. And it turns what might have been a straightforward ransomware event, by the way, they're not straightforward, this is an example, into a psychological, precise extortion campaign aimed directly at the board. And it's crafted to create maximum pressure with minimum response time. The message, arrives not as a generic demand, but it's specific, it's personal, it's designed, it's targeted to elevate a IT incident into a legal, reputational, and executive crisis. And before the security team has even finished, scoping the initial compromise, if you will, what that is, this is what the mean time to exposure is. And most kind of breach narratives, they focus on the wrong moment. The entry point is absolutely, you need to focus on that, but the entry point is not where organizations succeed or fail under pressure. That happens in the gap between, compromise and consequence.
Yeah.
And that period between the moment an adversary gains access and the moment the access produces real measurable harm, that is, I've kind of given it a name. It's mean time to exposure, but you can call it whatever you like. So it's not just speed anymore. It's precision. Adversaries, they no longer need weeks and weeks to shift through gigabytes of stolen data. They can do it in hours, and that directly shrinks the window defenders have to act before consequences materialize. Whether every intrusion involves this level of sophistication is besides the point.
Yeah.
The capability exists, it's in practice today, and defenders cannot know in the moment which scenario they're facing. That uncertainty itself demands a faster, more consistent investigative response. And as defenders, we need to evolve. So it really changes our entire concept.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. And there's loads of comments from our audience as well. So thanks, guys, for interacting. We are live, so if you have questions, then feel free. So, by the way, there's also some love for golden jackets. So we have a human and not a robot who definitely wants a golden jacket. So go and get your certs. Go and do it. And hi to Rogave as well. So from both me and Himanshu. We've got a question though around from NEH around when do you think AI will start kind of understanding and anticipating attacker intent? And I guess there's a few different directions you could take this. There are some pretty effective ways to analyze tools, tactics, and procedures, so TTPs, as you mentioned. So, are you seeing, how are you seeing AI at the moment from a defense perspective? And then, where do you think that's going?
I mean, fantastic question for a start. If it's all about understanding the attacker's intent, from an AI perspective, I don't think we're there yet. What AI is very good at is finding those needles in a haystack. It's better correlation, better anomaly detection. It's better at surfacing things faster than a human can. It's generally useful, but that's obviously not understanding the intent. That's fast pattern matching. Excuse me. I think true intent reasoning is where AI looks at a sequence of behavior and understands what is the attacker's objective, which is still right now mostly a research problem. You mentioned MITRE, Rob. MITRE ATT&CK is a great framework. It maps out exactly how adversaries move through the environment, move through the foothold, where they get to. But it is also a map drawn after the battle. So attackers don't follow a checklist. They improvise. They combine techniques nobody's seen before. They operate in gaps between your data sources. And AI trained on known behavior patterns, struggles the moment something novel happens. And a novel is exactly what a good attacker does. The honest timeline, I think the capability for AI is going to be extremely meaningful in a few years for most organizations. That's assuming, you know, the data foundation is sorted first. But I guess the real answer to that question is stop waiting for AI to understand intent, start focusing on getting that context for the analyst faster. That's absolutely achievable today. The autonomous AI SOC is not. I'm going to be really bold here and say that. I think the moment you remove the human from the loop is the moment it gets very dangerous. You know, what AI proven in production is great at context gathering, log correlation, triage, bringing that investigation down from 30 minutes to 2. You know, that's real, that's valuable, that's achievable. But every deployment that actually works should have a human validating that conclusion before anything happens. And that's not really autonomous. It's and that's assisted, and the goal is absolutely, Rob, absolutely. And the goal is humans managing AI, not AI replacing humans. And that is the truth in security operations. And we're doing some really cool stuff. So what's kind of your take, Rob and Himanshu, on the AI security operations perspective?
I think, I mean, you know, we believe, I think, like, data is central to everything. So, you know, like, to your point, the more data and telemetry you can leverage in that intelligence process, the better it is for contextualization and correlation. Especially in the security operations world, we find that the telemetry often comes from so many disparate sources. So this process of normalization or standardization of that format actually helps increase or improve the efficiency of that correlation. And I think, like you mentioned, you know, there's the MITRE attack framework, or there's the Atlas framework, all of which are essentially tying these things together into a journey for a user to understand where and how you know, they should be taking actions. We have started seeing from customers the need for autonomous agents, to your point, in the security world. I think we use this term called the frontier agents. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. I think one of the examples of that is the AWS security agent, which is a frontier agent that learns from customers' environments and then is able to, like, you know, like, do some security pen testing and uncover vulnerabilities in code, etc. I think that was my point of view was going to be, Craig, was that, you know, do you foresee a world where, I think you used the term autonomous, where this frontier agentic concept comes in, where rather than being reactive, some of this becomes proactive and learns from behaviors and or patterns, and then predicts, you know, what potentially could happen next. I think what we are seeing now, and I think as Rob was mentioning, you know, it's been pretty evident in the news and the media these days around how you know, adversaries and bad actors can leverage artificial intelligence. But essentially, I think what we are finding is that you know, customers who have either delayed the you know, assessment of their security health or their security posture, you know, are the ones who are more nervous and concerned, because AI is just going to exponentially decrease the time of exposing those vulnerabilities and you know, shorten that time. So ultimately, you have to go and fix and address those fundamental key security issues anyways.
Yeah, that's I think what's going to, you know, that's what the biggest risk is. If you look at what's going on at the moment, just around vulnerabilities, what's AI good at? Looking at huge amounts of data and then finding those needles in a haystack, and then potentially speeding up the ability to exploit those. So vulnerabilities, we can't sit on the old vulnerability stack anymore and do the old manual prioritization and patching process. You have to get really, really good and automated at doing that. But a lot of this boils down to as well in terms of, look, what happens when you have a vulnerability that's exploited, how do you actually view what the threats are and do some threat hunting in terms of what are major risks, what are our entry points, what's exploitable? What are you doing around threat hunting? Because you mentioned when you first gave an intro, a concept of evidence-led threat hunting. Could you take us through that, Craig?
Yes, absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. So I came up with this concept called evidence-led threat hunting using AI agents. And it's all about finding low confidence alerts that are tracked against the same entity over time. So the concept really is focused on telemetry. So the problem is adversaries, they don't operate in single events. They leave fragments of activity over time. So when alerts are treated as like one-off decisions, those fragments are lost and the story really never fully forms. So the model really does something different. Instead of discarding those alerts after closure, signals are retained and tracked against that same entity over time. So an entity can be user, host, IP address. And then we start applying evidence accumulation, which is collecting signals across days, weeks, and hours. And then when enough evidence exists, it crosses a threshold. And this threshold, it does not mean compromise. It just means, do we have enough justification to go and threat hunt? And only at that point does it, execute a threat hunt, pulling in historical context and findings. Then the analyst goes and reviews those findings and really decides the outcome. So if you have a user entity that does unfamiliar sign-in location on one day, 2 days later, they launch PowerShell, 3 days later, they do a curl download. Every one of those alerts is reviewed in isolation. It's assessed, it's technically valid and closed. So there's no point to justify escalation. That's not a failure. That's how alerting is meant to work. But instead of those alerts disappearing into a black hole, those signals are retained as evidence, and tied back to that same entity over time. Then as activity spans across multiple domain areas like identity, email, endpoint, cloud, the picture starts to change. And this is where we have that memory layer. So we start having evidence conditions applied to that retained context. So analysts are no longer looking at individual alerts from the same entity. They're evaluating patterns. Is this behavior repeating from the same specific entity? Is it deviating from its normal behavior? No single alert is important anymore. No single condition is decisive. In traditional SOCs, this really lived in an analyst's head, reviewing all cases, deciding when something felt a bit deeper to go and search. And that decision point is when it reaches a boundary. Do we have enough evidence conditions met against the same entity? That entity could be me, to cross a defined threshold. And that threshold marks from passive observation into deliberate investigation. And this is not a declaration of compromise. Its purpose is simple. It defines the moment where observation is no longer sufficient. And this is where it moves from passive observation into active investigation. So we're now threat hunting for more information. We're looking at expanded time windows. We're pulling in historical data. And then once that threat hunt has been executed, it produces a set of findings. And this is the point where interpretation happens. We've collected the signals, we've got the evidence, we've crossed the threshold. No judgment is ever made here, but the analyst then goes and reviews those findings and assesses the intent. And they would decide whether the activity is benign, something that warrants continued monitoring, or if it's malicious. And this is where analysts were responsible for retaining that context. So we changed that process because it was so cognitive heavy on the analysts. We changed that process and we made it execute using AI agents, which takes over all of that operational burden. AI agents handle all the discovery work, the preparation, human involvement begins at the decision. It's a truly awesome piece of kit that we've been working on, to the extent where this actually helps stop 2 live ransomware attacks in 2 different customers in 2 different parts of the world at the same time. What a terrifying day that was. But there's a great threat hunt report which we have for Rackspace, and I do want to thank Nadia from the marketing team for helping me put that together. I do believe that's a QR code somewhere.
QR code right next to Himanshu.
Yes.
Amazing. Awesome.
So for our listeners, if you want to download and have a read around some of the threats that Rackspace are finding, then do click on the QR code, have a read, and reach out to our brilliant partners at Rackspace. Craig, it's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll be back very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, probably good evening somewhere around the world. Welcome to AWS Security Live. My name is Rob Hale. I lead AWS's security partner business in EMEA. So I help to glue together the amazing solutions from our partner community along with AWS services to solve for customer security challenges. As ever, I'm joined by a brilliant co-host. So, and Himanshu, you're the right side of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Rob. Himanshu here, lead the team of our worldwide security identity and governance specialists. We help customers with their security outcomes using AWS native security services as well as our partner tools. And then, the right side of the ocean is actually for London Summit. It's AWS Summit season in full swing in various different regional locations. And yesterday we were hosting live from our partner summit in London, and then today was a packed day at the AWS London Summit, and we had a lot of good customer conversations, good topics around leveraging AI for transforming businesses and productivity. And then speaking of that, some of our listeners have tuned in. Continuation from yesterday. It looks like. Please keep us in the chat going, where you're dialing in from, and if there's any specific topics you would like to talk about. And then, a lot of conversations with customers and partners. Speaking of partners, we have one of our service partners joining us today. It's Optiv, and looks like we have Brian from Optiv joining us.
Hey, Brian.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hi, Rob. Hi, Himanshu. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening across the world. Happy to be here and looking forward to active and interesting conversation.
Awesome. So Himanshu mentioned earlier, we're having a lot of conversations, obviously, with customers around AI. It seems to be, the thing that customers want to innovate with, and obviously we have AI from large language models. We also have agentic as well. This sounds like it's something that Optiv are doing as well. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing around AI and AI security?
I'd love to, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name's Brian Golumbeck, and I am a managing director at Optiv, where I lead a AI center of excellence. Now, there's a lot of organizations establishing centers of excellence, but Optiv, as a services partner, managed security services provider, AWS services, leader here, we built our AI COE to keep track of the market, understand what's going on. This stuff is happening so fast. Artificial intelligence, OpenClaw, Mythos, all of these different capabilities are being introduced at record pace. And as everyone knows, AI is best at making things faster. It works 24/7 and helps you automate and do things much more quickly. And so as that occurs, how do you keep track of what's going on with security? How do you understand that telemetry? And how do you work through those problems? Optiv's AI COE is actively working with customers on services engagements, working with our services team on what's happening in the market, and then building out the necessary capabilities, training staff, and making sure we can stay leading edge and be a trusted partner that organizations go to when they're trying to secure artificial intelligence.
And Brian, I think we worked in the past on a lot of different managed security services initiatives. I think one of the things that I believe that Optiv's done well is to set up that practice. I think before we go into security specific, would be good to get your insights in, where are customers in their journey when it comes to AI adoption today? I think, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk about, this is all just internal tooling and playground and sandboxing type environments. What are you seeing, especially when customers are coming to you for AI and AI security, and not just, for your own internal use, but especially in customers' journey, like where are they in that AI adoption journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Himanshu. And first, I'd like to pull up a graphic just to show you what the journey looks like overall. So you can find this at optiv.com/AI. It's a graphic we put together working with clients over all of the things, over the last 3 years, covering all of the things that we're doing projects on, meaning as you adopt AI, all of your security has to change slightly. 70% of it is leveraging what you have today, but then you have to improve or change it to accommodate an AI-enabled application and or to accommodate agentic AI. And this graphic, if you look at it, covers everything a security department does, but it also is individual projects or efforts that many of our customers are taking on in order to solve the AI problem. Some good examples are TPRM for AI, right? That involves each of the software providers out there that are providing software to a company are now adding AI to their repertoire. And as they do so, you have to revise contracts, communicate right to audit, ask for AI S-bombs or software bombs, bill of materials, AI bill of materials. You need to look into, will they allow you to get under the hood? How are they using your data? Another area that you need to work on is cloud guardrails. AWS has guardrails. AWS has the Frontier Security Agent. Those are new things that people have to learn and adopt. And it really comes down to a people problem. To answer your question more specifically, and we can drop the graphic, we're seeing customers across the spectrum, right? So we get approached every day by customers that are early in their journey. They're looking to build AI governance. They're trying to understand how do they determine or do a discovery across their environment to see what are people using for AI. There are customers who are blocking AI and only allowing certain AI models within their environment. Maybe that's Q or Nova or some of the other AWS models. There are customers who are further along, right? We have a number of customers that the way they've come to us is their business put in place an AI application, shadow AI, if you will. And that AI application was unknown to security until they went to scale it. And now the security team has been brought in, and as has happened in the past, because I've got 25 years in this business, they're having to bolt security on afterwards. They're having to figure out, where can security be added to that application. Then there are the more leading. I'm sorry. Did you have something to add, Rob?
It's really interesting. That resonates with what we're seeing, and I've sat on a number of roundtables with customers from a variety of industries. There is that mix, but I think what was almost unifying was even those who hadn't started or hadn't intentionally started. I think that's probably the more correct term. Their AI and agentic journey. They're looking at how do we do this properly in terms of putting in place a scalable foundation, because I think no one, and this is right from board leaders as well, so not just the security team, but even the CIO, the CTO, and the COO, and a chief risk officer if you're regulated. These guys are all looking at how do we make sure we're not putting security in as an afterthought. But what we can't do is we can't be the no people and block everything, because people are going to start using the tooling. And the challenge is, if we say no, human nature dictates that, look, they will go and find ways to be productive, and that may not be the most secure way of doing things. So I think it's a a big challenge that all organizations are looking to try and get right.
Yeah, there's proven research out there that 30% of the models on Hugging Face might have malicious code in them. And as you get further down the journey and you're starting, and we're working with organizations that are doing vibe coding, citizen coding, they're enabling more people than just their developers to use AI. And we've even got organizations that have agentic platforms in production. Now, I would say those are, less than average, or meaning there are a small percentage of organizations out there that are truly full agentic in production. And the reason is typically security. One of the concepts we've been working on with advanced organizations is the difference between an assistant and an agent. And it crosses over into frontier agent a little bit. Let me describe what I'm talking about. An assistant operates inside of the identity of a user. And from a SOC perspective, from a logging and telemetry perspective, it's harder to differentiate that was an that was an assistant that did something versus the user doing that. We've seen instances where a compromised user account is sending out thousands of emails overnight, right? And they're persistent. They're looking to not get caught so that they can continue to send those emails. And it's pretty unusual for a user to send thousands of emails overnight. And so it was eventually caught, but it was there for a couple of months, as I understand it. And at first they're like, why is this user doing this, right? And it was an assistant. The counterpoint or counter term is an agent. And we're coaching and working with security architects and enterprise architects on, well, how do you define an agent? What is the difference between an agent and an assistant? And the first thing is identity. An agent has its own identity. That allows you to have its own intent, its own scope, its own purpose. Generally, an agent will have an owner, right? When you develop code, you know that the developer is responsible for that code. And if it misperforms in production, then you can go back to the developer to fix it. When it comes to an agent, we've got to figure out, well, who owns the decisions an agent makes? And are they willing to allow that agent to make those decisions autonomously? Because we're seeing at least 3 levels of risk, right? There's autonomous agent decisioning. There's autonomous agent decisioning with validation by a human, meaning on a regular basis, a human goes through, pulls those decisions, reviews them, and makes sure that the agent is operating the way they expect it to. And then for high risk applications, say safety or health or privacy, things that the CISOs and others don't want to get wrong, you might have approval, meaning the agent presents an approval to a human before it makes those decisions. And obviously, these are processes that have to be built to allow an organization to progress through from, hey, you might want approval in the beginning until you feel comfortable with that agent making those decisions. Then you move it to validation. And then after a certain amount of time, you may say, you know what? We've validated it thousands of times. It always makes the right decision. We're going to allow it to move to autonomous and do things on itself. And this is an iterative governance process that has to be built within an organization. And it's something new, which is great because in my opinion, I see AI creating lots of jobs. We all see the news about some organizations believe they are reducing jobs. And I've got an analogy for that, but I wanted to pause and see if you guys had any questions or comments.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and it's something that business value, particularly with agents, is going to increase as the agents get more complicated. You have a chain or a flow of agents; they can do more stuff. They have access to more data and more systems. So the business driver is always, hey, we want to do more, but actually, what we need to do is, and this is advice that we give, and we work with partners like Optiv and customers as well to implement, is get the basics right first. So eat the security vegetables. You've got to consider that an agent is, I had this from a customer. They're digital toddlers. So they might operate the way you think they're going to operate, but you need to kind of have some supervision around them before you put them in a perfectly clean white room with a load of crayons, because they might not do what you want them to do. So starting from those discrete use cases actually might have some value to the business. It's probably a good place to start. Get your muscle memory and your governance and your systems in place and controls in place. So then you can start to build up the complexity, as you say, as you get more confident with the fact that the agent is, one, going to do what you think it's going to do, and two, is going to solve for your use case. Hey, we've got a question actually that leads into this in the audience. By the way, if you're watching and you've got a question for Brian or Himanshu, maybe even for me, then put in a question in the chat and we'll discuss it. So, question is, since the AI land space is changing so quickly, how do we implement programs that are future-proof as possible, so they're not immediately stale? So I think this is probably talking about, and this, I had this conversation actually last night with a brilliant group of customers, but the question was, we've just developed what we thought was a brilliant model in-house, and it's great, and then Notebook LLM comes out, and it just makes our model and our whole app just completely, defunct overnight. So, how do you advise customers on how to go about this?
I'm not sure there's any way of making things future-proof. Just when you think that this is the latest, greatest revolutionary thing, someone comes along and builds OpenClaw, right? Which kind of shook the industry a little bit, because it wasn't a huge company that did this. It was more of an individual. And they built a local assistant to run on your computer. At the same time, it, to my knowledge, is not very secure. And so the first step in every innovation is proof of value or proof of concept. Can we actually do what we're talking about? And that's why, the chief AI officers, the chief data officers, the CTOs are getting gobs of AI funding, is because no organization's leadership wants to be blockbuster, right? And I use blockbuster as the example because the internet basically decimated their business model and they didn't adapt. And so when people say, well, why are executives pouring money into AI? The logical answer is because they don't want to be blockbuster. Right. And that's it. Okay. Now, past that, they've got to figure out how to leverage AI within their business model, just like we had to figure out how to leverage the internet or to leverage cloud. And so there's some repeatable things we can use that we learn from those, but there's also the speed at which this is happening, both the speed of change and how fast AI can solve things. It's a speed that, is exponentially more than anything we've dealt with in the past. And so there's actually two camps we run into to control and manage this. And by the way, to answer the future-proof question, I don't have any magic sauce, right? If I had an easy button for that, I'd probably be running a company somewhere versus working where I work. But the idea is to build process instead of relying entirely on technology. The hardest part about this transformation is the people. They don't understand it. They don't understand the terms. They used AI once 2 years ago and thought, it's kind of mediocre, and they don't understand that it's advanced 100 times in the past 2 years. And so we as practitioners and as believers and as people who are trying to help implement it and do it in a secure fashion have to get the word out, have to do AI literacy, and have to build that sustainable process and train people on it. Because I can put code in place that'll do everything I want in a computer. It's the outside the computer that's the more difficult thing. Optiv is doing things like organizational change management, which is understanding who your stakeholders are, working through the problems and issues that they have, cataloging them, and it's like anything, right? You've got to catalog it, figure it out, and then knock it down, right? It's like bowling. You set the pins up and then you knock them down.
I think
Those are the things we're doing.
Awesome, and I think it's it's wider than security, right? This is about fostering innovation, and that's a deep cultural thing, and it's also around enablement, and this is a conversation with that I've had with many customers, but I think in the next kind of 6 months, a year, it's not going to be IT who are going to be innovating as much with agents as it is going to be your users, and this is true whether you're a tech company, and I'll absolutely take the criticism. Hey, this is coming from AWS, right? You're a tech company and you've got loads of technical people, but the whole thing around agents and around agentic and some of the the vibe coding and community coding that's going on is that it's democratizing the whole process. And so the best way you're going to work with identifying even what processes, what should we put an agent against or an assistant to make it more even more valuable or help people, you need to start with the people. So you need to start with the process, and then to kind of answer Will Raisin's question a little bit on this. I think the key is, and our approach is not to necessarily say, hey, we've got this great new service or model or whatever, and it's going to do this for you, and then leave it there. Give the people the tools that enable them to innovate themselves. So what we're building is a scalable platform that has the controls in place that allows us to deal with the scale of securing identity and access and threat and all those sort of things that we need to look at as security folks. And I think that's the kind of key thing that customers are putting in place.
Well, one of the things I think that also resonates, tied to Brian's point, is that what we believe is that if you really do want to future-proof yourself, is that you want to leave the choice and flexibility open and not try to lock yourself down into any particular foundation model or a knowledge base too early in the process as well. I think this is early days, and there are a lot of things that are evolving very rapidly, very quickly. We are just seeing, even in the foundation model space, there are different models that have expertise in different areas, whether it's image generation or graphics, or whether it's, human readable, just simple natural language processing. And now others which might be security focused. So I think this is one of the reasons why early on when we were gathering this feedback, customers told us that, they would like to have the choice and flexibility of choosing, whatever foundation model that they have. So that build process needs to have this adaptability to plug and play these models that come along. So I think that's one of the other considerations I would suggest is that, not try to lock yourself down into any particular technology and leave that room for adaptability open.
Yeah, that's a tremendous insight, Himanshu. I think Optiv built out a AWS Bedrock hardening service for just that reason. And I'd like to show that on screen here for just a second so people can understand. One of the most common questions we've been getting from CISOs is, where do we start? How do we enable clients or the business to innovate, right? How do we give them a safe sandbox to play in, right? And so Optiv built this service to come in and connect the necessary tissue between, Bedrock, the SOC, your response processes, etc. What do you need to log? How do you find the right logs that say, oh, this is an approved model that we allow in the environment, or this is something someone downloaded off of Hugging Face? You want to be aware of those things. You don't necessarily have to block them, but you need the detection and you need the incident response capabilities. And these are new questions that the SOC isn't necessarily used to dealing with. A good example is hallucination. Hallucination can be good or bad, right? Some of the creativity of these models relies on them to hallucinate, to find solutions that are outside of the norm. But if that hallucination is too far off from what is, what's wanted, then you need to be aware of that. You need to involve the data science team, and you need to work through those problems. And so the AWS Bedrock hardening service that Optiv has is designed to give clients a sandbox, so that they can say, here you go, developers, here you go, IT people, here's a safe place for you to experiment with these models, try different things. And we're okay with it because we've set it up in a secure manner, and we will know if there are concerns. And you can drop the graphic now. But the overlying thing is trust but verify, right? A concept we've been using for many years. Right. And so how do you verify when it's technology that maybe your IT team doesn't understand, or, you've got cloud people, but you don't have Bedrock people that understand that? Well, you have to educate and learn and start to turn on things like the Frontier Security Agent, so it can help you with this work, because the overarching known fact is everything is faster. AI is making everything happen faster, whether that is innovation and positive to the organization, or in the hands of malicious actors, they can be faster too. And so you have to set up your logging and response and ability to manage identity and data protection and other capabilities to be at that wire or machine speed.
Awesome. Just from your experience working, leading the AI COE and working with customers, what are a couple of pitfalls and a couple of things that that work well that you've seen work within customers when they start their AI journey, or maybe when they're looking to scale?
Yeah, well, it starts with AI governance and having a fast process to designate things low risk, right? If you have a hardened Bedrock environment and you have models that you trust and you have logging and telemetry turned on, and someone says, hey, I want to use all the standard stuff and I want to just solve a business problem, that's low risk, and it should be approved as fast as possible and let them run. Right. And then understanding what are the things that cause it to be slightly higher risk, whether that is safety or privacy data, whether that is PII and consumer data, or if you're in a regulated industry, whatever data is associated with that, that maybe makes it automatically medium risk until the organization has a standardized approach for that type of environment, in which case now it's low risk again. And it's about creating a lot of low risk scenarios that allow the business to move quickly. And we're finding that, sometimes security isn't getting funding, but the CTO or the chief data officer or the chief AI officer, they're getting the funding. And so you have to partner up. You have to coordinate with them and help them understand that you want them to move fast, right? Because it's real easy to build something in pre-production. It's real easy to build it in a sandbox. When you try and scale it and when you try and take it out to the world or to the vast majority of the employee population, that's when both the reliability, availability, scalability, and security all start to break down. And that, in my opinion, and from the limited evidence I have from working with clients, is why there's sometimes difficulty in the ROI. The ROI was built in a pre-production environment with certain assumptions, and as they move into production, those assumptions start to fall apart. And one of those is how much logging, telemetry, how much security needs to be wrapped around the application to make it safe at scale. And that's limiting the ROI. And the only way to fix it or to solve it is to get security in the game early.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is have a good way of scoping either use cases or processes. So actually, there's the AWS agentic and LLM scoping matrix as well that customers use, and I'm sure Optiv have also got frameworks as well. And then start simple, but make sure your security is right at the start. So shift left in all definitions to make sure that security is right at the start and enabling stuff, not that audit right at the end, where the first time security sees it is when your service owner says, hey, we're ready to go, can you audit our service?
And looks
100%
like,
agree.
yeah, and looks like, like if you need to get started and have an assessment, Brian's got us covered here from Optiv.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, it's been an
Thanks,
absolute
Himanshu.
pleasure.
Rob, it's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you so much. And thanks to our audience. We'll see you next time.